Hello everyone, and welcome to the 158th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Judge Doom from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Fair warning before we get started, if I'm talking a little quietly in this video, that's because I'm a bit sick right now, so forgive me if I sound a bit off. One of the most influential crossover films ever made, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a classic noir film that's laced with silliness, whimsy, and a decent amount of grit that has more than earned its designation as a timeless classic. Part of the reason for its success is the brilliant portrayal of our subject of this video by Christopher Lloyd, Judge Doom. A crazed toon hell-bent on destroying his own people while enriching himself in the process, Judge Doom is a nightmare taken straight out of the Technicolor realm to plague reality, a man-made monster that's as diabolical as they come. And in this video, we'll be examining everything related to this judicial menace so we might better understand all the evil he unleashes upon the hapless populace of Los Angeles and Toontown. I should note before we continue that though this film is loosely adapted from a novel of a similar name, they're quite different in a number of ways, so we'll only be focusing on the film as well as a comic pertaining to Judge Doom's story, if any of you were curious. But before we get started talking about Judge Doom, let's talk about our sponsor for this video. Introducing FlexiSpot and their unmatched line of standing desks. FlexiSpot has revolutionized the desk of the future to make it the premier option for desk jockey and drug barons alike. FlexiSpot is leading the kinetic furniture movement around the world with affordable desks that can change heights with the press of a button. For too long now, I've suffered back pains and neck strains due to the hours I've spent sifting through the particulars of these monstrosities with bad posture, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the same pains due to your own line of work. But no longer, dear viewer. Neither you, me, or these Oscar-winning actors need to suffer any longer. FlexiSpot has the perfect upgrade to fit all your deskular needs. With the kinetic future FlexiSpot offers, you can now burn calories right at your desk. Put all those static hours you spent hunched over your desk in the past and reinvent yourself with FlexiSpot by going to FlexiSpot.com and using my code VILE to get 10% off your order. FlexiSpot, work like new with a desk that works for you. Thank you FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. In the film, Judge Doom appears to us both as a stern and no-nonsense lawman and as an enigmatic and maniacal toon who holds no regard for either toon or human life. And from what we receive here, there isn't too much to go off of as far as establishing a backstory for the judge. Seeing as Judge Doom was in fact a toon wearing a human suit, there was an effort made to discover who exactly that toon was, and many fans have come to the conclusion that he was the pistol-packing possum that we see on a poster in R.K. Maroon's office. There are a few things in particular that could point to this being his true identity. The color of the possum's eyes, which are the same red as Doom's, the fedora he wears, which Doom also wears, and well, this one is just something I noticed, but I think a possum leading a gang of weasels is sort of fitting. I know, possums and weasels aren't really related in any way, but I mean, come on. Kind of cool, isn't it? Anyway, it is a pretty convincing theory, especially when you consider the possum is the only toon that we see in the film that doesn't actually make a physical appearance. However, there was a series of Roger Rabbit comics released after the film, and in issue 54, The Resurrection of Doom, we're given a pretty solid backstory for the judge through the following newsreel. In Toontown last week, the cartoon community celebrated the demise of one of its most hated members, Judge Doom, confessed murderer of private investigator Theodore Valiant, brother of Eddie Valiant. Doom's plot to turn Toonstown into a freeway was foiled when he was dissolved in a pool of deadly dip, becoming a victim of his own creation. In reality, Judge Doom was a toon named Baron Von Rotten. Von Rotten began his film career in 1921 at a small cartoon studio in Kansas City. Von Rotten was commissioned to portray villains in early black and white cartoons, but when he moved to Hollywood in 1923, his career took off. It was there that he joined the newly created Toon Actors Guild, and he soon gained a reputation as the Toon of 1,000 Faces. Some of his most famous portrayals included the evil sawmill operator in Bump on a Log, the Minotaur in Mary Mack and the Minotaur, the abominable snowman in Malice in Winterland, and Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Osaka Castle. During the war, he acted in propaganda in toons portraying the enemy. During the filming of Mother Goose Step, Von Rotten had an accident. An exploding grenade left him unconscious for 2 weeks. When he finally awoke, his friends sensed the change in his personality. After the accident, Von Rotten was rarely seen out of makeup. He continued to portray his characters long after his films had concluded. Consequently, few people knew what Von Rotten really looked like. This rare footage shows him at the hospital recovering from the accident. As a result of the accident, Von Rotten's most unusual feature were his eyes. They were a shocking addition to his monochromatic wardrobe. Doctors were at a loss to explain his blazing red eyes, which Von Rotten went to great lengths to hide behind dark glasses. Recently, members of the press took a tour of Von Rotten's mansion. Memorabilia from hundreds of cartoons, including props, costumes, exposure sheets, scripts, and storyboards covered the walls of his estate. In In Von Rotten's private chambers on the top floor of the mansion, reporters glimpsed his top-secret makeup and plastic surgery laboratory, which was complete with ink, paint, brushes, and elaborate photo retouching equipment. In the center of it all, that was allegedly stolen in 1940, all that remains of Baron Von Rotten is a jar of dip, in which he was dissolved. So, it would appear that Judge Doom isn't the possum that we previously thought he was. However, considering that Baron Von Rotten was known as the Tune of a Thousand Faces, it's entirely possible that the pistol-packing possum was one of his more famous roles, which would explain why R.K. Maroon had a poster of him in his office. Regardless of whether that's true or not, this backstory gives us insight into how Doom may have manifested one of his primary characteristics: insanity. Now, we know that tunes are impervious to physical harm, but we're never given any indication that they're immune to mental harm, and it would seem that Baron Von Rotten's run-in with a rogue grenade, while leaving him physically unharmed, severely impacted his mental health. After waking up from what was essentially a 2-week coma, the Baron's entire psyche shifted. No longer was he simply a tune who played villains. He was a villain, a character who couldn't break from the fantasy he played on screen and made it his new reality. But why? Why did a tune who seemed to have once enthusiastically identified with his own kind and enjoyed his profession to the point that he filled his home with memorabilia take such a drastic turn? I believe that's because after this mind-boggling tragedy reordered Von Rotten's mind, something that had been building in the Baron's subconscious for years finally boiled over and transformed him into the monster that is Judge Doom. You see, for decades, the Baron had been playing the bad guy, the vile cretin, and brutal monster that everyone belted with physical harm and recoiled from in utter revulsion. And yes, he had found much success playing the villain, but I have no doubt that as a career villain, the Baron was regarded by his fellow Toons with a certain degree of contempt, not to mention by the people who feared and loathed him as the shape-shifting creature who tried to harm their precious heroes. And not only that, but how many times had he been forced to endure torment in order to advance the plot of the heroes in these stories? And how many dozens upon dozens of times was the Baron forced to suffer the agony of defeat, even if it was only ever simulated? Well, once the Baron woke from his coma and realized he had been taken out of commission for 2 entire weeks because of his profession, that was the final straw for Baron Von Rotten. He vowed to himself that such humiliation would never again be assigned to his person, in the process losing any shred of empathy he may have had prior to the accident. And he was now a creature that was willing to not just enrich himself by taking advantage of both humans and Toons, but exterminate his own kind. And while the red eyes he suddenly developed after he awoke might have been a side effect of the blast, it stands to reason that these new eyes were but a projection of the malice and utter insanity that now filled every ounce of Judge Doom's soul. The time of endless defeat for Baron Von Rotten was over. Now came the time for Judge Doom to emerge the victor, and he would do so by using the extensive knowledge of villainy that he had cultivated over the long decades of his career to destroy any trace of the Toons and their happy little village. The first order of business for the newly minted Doom was to provide himself with the capital he'd need to finance any future criminal endeavors. So Doom orchestrated the robbery of the First National Bank of Toontown, a heist that netted him over a zillion simoleons, in the process murdering Eddie Valiant's brother Teddy by dropping a safe on his head. Next, Doom disguised himself as a concerned citizen who was ready to provide judgment in the courts of Toontown, and so he bought an election that granted him the title of judge, and he became the man responsible for deciding crime and punishment in the Toontown district. This allowed Judge Doom to put in place his own form of law enforcement, the Toon Patrol, his gang of weasels that were ready to commit any sinister crime their boss needed them to. Once Judge Doom happened upon the city council's plan to construct a freeway, inspiration struck, and Doom now knew of a way to not only enrich himself further, but destroy his brethren in the process. So, Doom concocted the dreaded mixture known as dip, a combination of 3 separate paint thinners that promised to make short work of any creature drawn or painted. Now the only issue was formulating the perfect plan that would swiftly melt Toontown down to its last atom. So came about the plan to purchase Toontown and Maroon Studios from their respective owners, Marvin Acme and R.K. Maroon. And with these 2 properties in hand, Doom would have had no problem destroying Toontown. However, Marvin Acme refused to sell Toontown to Doom's front company, Cloverleaf Industries, and so he murdered Marvin Acme in order to find and destroy his will, which stipulated that upon his death, that the ownership of Toontown would transfer to the Toons. And so ensued the central plot of this film to find out who framed Roger Rabbit and really murdered Marvin Acme. Now, in this newly created Judge Doom persona, we find a man who projects an image of drab accountability and moral terror. He's cold and calculating, but maniacal in the passion that he displays for the realization of his plans. While his stern demeanor and manufactured dedication to solving the murder of Marvin Acme by bringing Roger Rabbit to justice imparts upon us viewers that this man is an uptight and no-nonsense man of the law, it also unnerves us in the way that up until the climax of the film, he presents himself as near emotionless and quietly sinister whenever he appears on screen. Once he's confronted by Eddie Valiant Valiant & Co. at Acme's factory, he plays a similar, yet different tune, waxing grandiose about the brilliance of his diabolical plot, and battling with Eddie in a stalwart and menacing way that really sells the previous label of gargoyle that was given to him by this valiant detective. However, who Judge Doom was nothing compared to what kind of beast he truly was once the curtain was drawn. And once Baron von Rotten re-emerges, we're treated to a terror that has had many children, myself included, recoiling in fear as this macabre Looney Tune attempts to bring his plans to fruition by chasing after Eddie Valiant in a whimsically murderous way that only a Toon can. Here, with his high squeaky voice and his repertoire of shape-shifting weapons, we're treated to a character that's utterly sadistic and exceptionally cruel, a villain who just by watching him in action for mere seconds imparts upon us the crazed brutality that he would readily unleash upon anyone given the chance. Thankfully, this monster was stopped before he could do any further damage to the people around him, and perhaps if the judge's mind had not been so warped by his accident and the building hatred within him, maybe he would have realized that there was as much folly in his plan as there was in the machinations of the many villains he had played in the past, as each and every one of them always failed to see their dastardly plots through to the end, just as this new creature of madness and malice eventually did. And at this end, what is there to say about the dreaded Judge Doom? He was a being of exceptional cunning and intelligence with a broken mind who was so utterly without care for any and all life that he was willing to eradicate all of his fellow Toons in a veritable genocide in order to enrich himself and exact his revenge upon them. While much of the terror of Judge Doom can be found in his appearance and mannerisms, it's these traits compounded by his sadism and self-serving ways that truly drive home how horrendous he is. And while the story of Baron von Rotten is tragic, the insane brutality following his transformation into Doom is terrifying, and he has without a doubt earned his place as one of the most iconic and sinister villains ever to appear on the silver screen. But that's not all there is to say about Judge Doom and his machinations. While this story presents us with a villain who serves as a demented antithesis to the happiness and joy brought by his Toon brethren, Judge Doom's plot is more so meant to showcase one of the flaws that's inherent to capitalism, the ramifications of unrestricted greed. And his plot was actually inspired by real-world events. In the film, Judge Doom talks about buying up the red car, which was a nickname that people used to refer to the Pacific Electric Company's line of streetcars, interurban cars, and buses, which at the time was the largest electric railway system in the world. There's a conspiracy theory that theorizes that during the same time period the film takes place, multiple companies operating in the greater Los Angeles area, in tandem with the local and state governments, conspired to buy all the land that was occupied by Pacific Electric's rail system and run them out of business so they could build the gargantuan freeway system that now dominates Southern California. While this might seem like an aggressive yet innocent enough business plan that's more akin to a hostile takeover than anything, you have to keep in mind the exchange between Eddie and Judge Doom when he's explaining his plans to him. Judge Doom states that the advent of this freeway system will allow for a string of gas stations, inexpensive motels, restaurants that serve rapidly prepared food, tire salons, automobile dealerships, and billboards. And while the freeway system in practice is a fantastic way to facilitate faster and more efficient automobile travel, it's also a gateway to immense profits for the many industries that are required to keep the freeways maintained, and for the ones that provide the passengers of these automobiles with basic necessities as they traverse these roads. Eddie remarks upon hearing this plan that no one is going to drive on this freeway when they can take the red car for a nickel. And now we've arrived at the nefarious nature of both this imagined and possibly real plot. Yes, by its nature alone, capitalism is a tool that people can use to present their ideas to the populace, and if those ideas are perceived well by the public, anyone is more than welcome to usher in their new innovations by getting rid of any old ones. However, when you cut out the middleman and conspire with a group of other capitalists to eliminate a competitor, product, or service that serves as a roadblock to your plans in order to influence the public's perception of the events surrounding the advent of your new product, you run into a bit of a gray area morally speaking. It's fair game if two competing companies present their ideas to the public, and the public decides whether or not these companies will prosper. But it's not so fair game if one company decides to undermine another in order to overcome their competition by forcing them out of business. Not only that, but by eliminating a rival without the market playing out its natural course, you've now deprived people of a product that might have been useful and more efficient so you could enjoy larger profits. With the freeway system, there are a few ways in which the advent of such a system can have an effect on people. You have, of course, the elimination of a cheap transportation system that people could rely on. And while cars provide people with more personal efficiency as far as transportation is concerned, not everyone can afford a car. But you also have to consider how much land that such a massive construction project like a freeway is going to require. And that might require people to be coaxed out of their homes to facilitate this new project. Or if they aren't, their living situation might be impacted by the surrounding businesses or the freeway itself. Also, with the closure of the red cars, I'm sure many people lost their jobs, and while most people in this situation will eventually manage to find employment elsewhere, some might not have, which could lead to a whole host of issues. And for those that did, they surely experienced some sort of hardship immediately after losing their jobs. So is this type of business practice evil? Well, that honestly depends on your own views on the matter, but the fact remains that engaging in this type of business strategy requires the perpetrator to negatively impact the lives of others in some way in order to realize their ambitions. And just as Judge Doom is a toon willing to harm toons for the sake of profit, albeit in a rather extreme way, there are plenty of humans who have done much the same to other humans, and I for one believe that isn't right. And just like Judge Doom, his plans, and any plans like them, deserve to be called evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Judge Doom? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.